It is the best hour of your day. It is tipping points and puzzle pieces. So, we're going to have a riveting conversation for you today, and we have something really special for you. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to let Mark talk about it. But, it's the new year, and we always have to find different ways to bring him forward. So, Mark, it starts with an M. So, let's go ahead and bring forth the magnificent, the majestic, the miraculous Mark Boatwright Frost.
All
How
the
you
good
doing
M
there, Mark?
word. Yeah, all the good M words. At least there's not moron,
Well, this is a kid.
mudraker.
This is a family-friendly show, so,
Ah, all right.
how
So,
you doing?
yeah, I'm doing great. Martin Luther King weekend for you. You've been so busy you can't even breathe. I'm glad to see you today.
Yeah, I'm glad to see me too.
So, today we're going to be talking about food. Now, as we talked about the last episode, we're changing things up a little bit. The next several episodes will be about projects that the Kitsap Resiliency Project is driving. And so today is food for all because I'm pretty sure all of us like food. And we have a special guest. And I met this man many, many years ago. I worked for a startup, a tech startup in Silicon Valley. And one of the hardest, most soul twisting jobs I've ever had.
Mm.
But I was saved by this young lady named Heidi Kobara, who was my executive admin. And she was the most amazing admin I have ever had, bar none. And she's married to this guy named Dan, who's a chef, and I didn't really know much about him. And then we went to Marriott for brunch, and then I got to know a lot about him. So food was the food, the setup, everything was perfect. And as you know, I cook myself, and I've worked in the food industry on and off as well. And I don't hold a candle to Dan. So I want to introduce this gentleman who also introduced me to the scarcity problem with fish in the world. And let's have a talk about food. So, Dan, come on board.
Hello, hello. How's everybody doing today?
So, how long have we known each other?
15 years.
15 years?
I've been married to Heidi for 21.
So,
So
and
good
I
math.
think you weren't married yet when I first met you. So just over
so
20
then
years
it's
because
been
yeah, I've been up here 21 years. So it has to have been about 22, 23.
having fun.
Yeah. So it's been a long time. So you've had kind of an illustrious career. I'm just going to run through some of the things that you've done. I met you when you were doing, as you said, pointed out, a part-time gig at the Marriott. You worked for Guggenheim. I know that for a while in another company, you were the assigned chef to Larry Ellison of Oracle and had to take care of his personal needs and requirements, which were, and you and I've talked about on a couple of occasions, are a challenge. And I understand that because I'm allergic to wheat and corn, not gluten,
Oh,
actual
yeah.
wheat. So my life is right in that zone of having to find solutions to difficult problems. I know recently you were at the Mountain Winery. I know you set up the De Young Museum. Um, anything you want to say is? Let me ask you, what was your best experience? What was your favorite thing to do?
I would have to say, so many wonderful experiences. Some amazing. We did some really amazing events there, as well as just and really getting into local purveyors, local produce. Part of the program there, and I really like the Mountain Winery too. I'm a little cut short, but I was having a great time at the Mountain Winery. It's a great location, beautiful, but I would even say when I was working at Oracle, I not only did I doing primarily his executive business centers. So we had at the time South Africa was one of our guests. We had a lot of high end people coming in. Enjoyed that experience as well. So a little bit of everything.
Excellent. I spend a lot of time in kitchens in my many years because I've done a lot of things, and I don't think we've ever really talked about that. But I started working as a prep chef in a small chain called Salmagundi's in Southern California,
Mm.
and that was I loved doing the food. I loved doing the work. I hated who I worked for. By and large, kitchen experiences were not a lot of fun. I've worked for caterers, and hold on just a quick second. Um, all right, I worked for caterers. I've worked for in kitchens. I've done front ends at a local casino, ran front end of the house. I love the interaction with the people. I love the food. I hate it when people do food badly. And
Yeah.
I've had some of those experiences where I was on the front end of the house and I looked at the people in the kitchen and go, "Really? You think this is okay to serve?" So yeah, we've both had some of those experiences. I'm absolutely certain where we kind of like rolled our eyes and went, "Do the best you can."
Mad respect for anybody who's done it in the industry. I always get people who say, "Hey, chef, I want to go into food." I'm like, stop a second here. Before you do that, realize it's not a lot of glory. You'll probably not be on Food Network, especially this was back. The idea of becoming a celebrity chef was all the rage, and it's you got to be able to chop a day with a smile and still do all the other things. So
Yeah,
it's tough business to do, but
and there's a lot of criticism. Always a lot of criticism,
yeah, oh yeah,
and not and you're in the middle because you've got it from the management. And I will tell you, my experience is that most managements in restaurants are not great experiences. And I will say that a lot of the customer base are also not great experiences. So when you say you've got to smile a lot and get the job done, that's pretty much my experience as well.
oh yeah. I've always enjoyed interacting with diners, with guests. Is an experience you can turn somebody's day around. I have the advantage of doing a lot of corporate food that you see day in and day out, so you can get to know them, which is nice. I've also done work where it's table touches, and that's not quite with the customers, but it's still nice. And management's a mixed bag. I've had serious and some absolutely not fabulous managers. I'm not going to name any names, obviously.
Yeah,
The chef's position is where it starts and stops.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about food today, and so I'm going to preface some of this with the fact that you were the first one to ever introduce me, and actually you just sent a blurb out on Facebook, and I followed that about swap. It was a substitution fish list from, I believe, the Monterey Bay Aquarium. This is years ago. You may or may not remember it.
mm-hmm.
But that started me doing research on fish and finding out that the Grand Banks is predominantly fished out, that the Gulf of Alaska is fishing out, and the reason that halibut prices are through the bloody roof and about the price of a small car is because they're fished out, and that means that we're not doing a good job of controlling the resource of our fishes, and that
And
substitution
Alaska
only
is one of
works.
the best managed fisheries in the world, and they're struggling. So you can imagine,
Yeah,
literally, you have pirates fishing for things. It's even globally that we have a lot of crises going on in the oceans.
right.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about food here. It's like one of those things that we kind of need. And actually, a pinch for this Saturday, we are showing the movie Soylent Green on Saturday morning in the library because I think kind of an awareness of what it is, and I love the fact that somebody had the cojones. Hope that slides by the YouTube stuff. The cojones to put out a product called Soylent, considering that the story was based in the year 2022.
Yeah, I have one. I've tried that. I have a sample of it. It's interesting. I remember Soylent Green. The most amazing scene to me as a got to be teenager teenager at the time, sorry, was the scene where they're in and they're in a wealthy person's home, and he's got
Yes.
a piece of beef in the fridge, and they all like, and of course, as Americans, we tend to eat beef every day, or and 3 times on Thursday. But that scene, and that is extremely prophetic. I mean,
Yep.
meat in this country and how it's creeping up and creeping up. That's we might be looking forward to in the future, where having an actual piece of is not for a regular person,
Everybody.
it's for the ultra wealthy.
Yep. And then there's the whole climate and the whole climate issue with raising meat. And, we all hear about cow farts and all the rest of that. And I'm not going to go into that, but there was something I read in the book Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them Much, I believe was Al Franken. And he talked about pig farms in the Carolinas, and that they have giant poly vats, millions of gallons of pig shit in these vats. And they are grandfathered in under the EPA, so no one enforces anything. And how they deal with it is they just blow holes in it with a shotgun to let it drain out a while, and then they reseal themselves. And I was like, going, really? And then I went and researched it, and sure enough. And one of the things I double checked on was a piece of information in the book that was about one of the vats having collapsed and poisoned 100 miles of the Nueces River. Basically killed everything in the river.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's fermented pig feces. And that's, first of all, I mean, really, that's energy, right? I mean, you can break that
methane
down for methane. And some absolutely do, but the amount of pig farming that goes on in this country, we are pork products to the rest of the world. Of course, we export massive amounts of food. We grow a lot of pork in this country, and there's a lot of opportunity, but absolutely a lot of it is not.
But the using that as methane would mean an investment, and that seems to be the problem here, especially when you have the oil companies not wanting to make people to make investments in shifting energy sources, because it hurts their bottom line. But we'll go into that in a little bit. I mean, I think most of us are now becoming aware that corporations do not do things in our best interest, especially when it comes to resources and or longevity. Short-term profit always trumps, the right thing to do. But what we're talking about today is, food, and we won't be talking about pork or meat very much because I haven't had time to really dive into it and do serious research. I know it's an issue. I think I'm thinking about it here all the time about how the peninsula that I live on has some farmers and some beef and some pork, but it's not cost effective to buy local, and you can't buy much.
Oh yeah.
So, I don't pay much attention to that, but fish is something that I've always kind of relied on, and now I can't afford it. I buy what they call rockfish, which is, what, as far as I'm concerned, your standard mystery fish. Yeah. So I don't know what exactly that is. I know the categories that it falls under, but fish is a big problem. But worse than that is the agriculture. I mean, we have the local farms here. According to one chart, there were like 600 of them on the Kitsap Peninsula. If you go to the farmers market, you'll see 2 or 3, and then a whole bunch of people coming from the east side of the state bringing produce over. So I don't know who these 600 farms are selling to, or I've never seen that many farm stands, so I don't know where they're coming from. But when they do sell, they sell at a premium price, which I'm happy to pay to support them. But I'm also not getting what I'm expecting. I'm not getting the flavor of the food. I'm not getting the food I'm expecting to pay that I'm paying for. And that brings it to a question about several studies that have been done since the 1950s about the loss of nutrition in food, and therefore the loss of flavor in food because of our growing techniques. You have thoughts on that?
Heard quite a bit about this. I have not done the reading that I maybe ought to do. A lot of I don't want to say scaremongering. There's of information that is over the top. There's a certain amount of on both sides of the aisle. People like to sort of scare people to motivate them. Got a bunch of
Right.
people saying nothing's wrong, everything's fine. A bunch of people saying our soil is, everything is going to be disaster. I find the truth is often somewhere in the middle. I mean, there's a point of where are we getting, this nitrogen from? Where are we getting, and how much of it is washing out to the sea, which is causing more problems. I can't say. I mean, that's my area. I've heard about it. I certainly. I get local produce down here, and I have to say it's far better than what I get in the supermarkets. But I'm honestly not sure about that.
Okay. And it's fair. And
without doing some serious research.
yeah, and my information is I mean, I've read studies about it, and there is some pretty good science about the lack of loss of nutrition in produce. I have some ideas about why that is from other studies I've read. But anecdotally, I live in Washington State. We're an apple capital. I haven't had a good apple in 20 years. I bite into an apple these days. They're not crisp. They're mealy. They have no flavor, and it leaves me with almost a pear dryness in my mouth. And I'm like going, "What happened?" I remember like an apple you bite into, and you have that juice, and you have the flavor, and it's the crispiness, and you're going, "Where are those apples? Do they exist anymore?"
My obsessions. I love apples, and specifically, I love it's apple season. I'm there. I'm there trying to get my best products. And I lived in Massachusetts, and the Northeast is a big. It's definitely apple country. I was able to go to orchards and get fresh picked apples. And there's what you see with apples is storage. These apples are grown to be stored, ripened, and they just I don't eat the commercial apples. They no, and I have to look far and wide to find places where I can go pick my own or get fresh picked apples. Seasonal thing to be able to enjoy, and I adore them in season. I'm always looking for the different varietals. Like they're not the supermarket varietals because specifically they don't store a lot of store. But I did find that coming back to California became harder for me to find the local apples, and it's part of the culture is to have apple orchards, and a huge part of New England history. And here, although they do grow a lot of apples here, find good farmers, and I have fortunately one specifically because I know their apples quality. They're they're however they're doing it, they're picking them fresh, and it's a season. And I get from late August through about November, and then I'll make a bunch of apple puree. I'll make a bunch of my own homemade fruit leather. Going through the winter, and then it's over. And then I wait for citrus, and then spring. I get my favorite time of year is apples. But I absolutely have an apple obsession. I know exactly what you're talking about. Part of it is the tilt towards storage. People grow not to eat, but to be stored.
Which brings up the point that in Washington State, the average distance a piece of fruit or produce travels is 900 miles.
Right, from the orchard to the storehouse to a warehouse to a store. So,
and to get here, so you wonder about
that's my cat.
Oh, all right. So while Daniel's rescuing his cat from outside, couple of the things that I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to pull up my notes here so that I can speak clearly. Marwan, do you want to bring up the resilient ecosystems page
Absolutely.
for us, and we can talk about that.
Yes, I bring that up. It's an interesting conversation. Um, I'm not that much into apples, but I did want to ask, as I'm bringing that up, what about we work with some gleamers, uh, and so folks that are just having their natural apples growing in their yard. What do those taste like? My palate is not that refined.
Thoughts on local folks, Daniel? Oh, okay. So you may need to reboot. Okay. Um,
You
we're
got
having
it.
some. Okay, cool.
All right, so let me go ahead and pull this up for you. Yeah, it's
Okay.
just interesting listening to that conversation. And when Daniel comes back, I'm hoping before we jump off that you guys would talk about this egg issue with this bird flu going
We'll get
around
there.
and tens of millions of birds. It's scary.
Well, it's funny because when I started doing research on that,
Mhm.
I pulled up the USDA and it mentioned nothing about avian flu.
Really?
It talked about COVID, it talked about shipping issues, it talked about the weather, it talked not at all about avian flu.
Oh, wow.
But then I saw articles from newspapers that were talking all about the avian flu. Okay,
Mhm.
Daniel, did you have a chance to take a look at the links I sent you? I don't know if he's back yet.
That looks like he's still frozen. He has one
Okay,
bar there. Uh, the easiest way to do
all
it
right,
may be to have him call you. So Daniel is in California.
okay,
And well, we got weather challenges, so we're doing what we can
There you
here.
go.
oh,
All
he's
right,
back.
there we go.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, all right. So we were briefly talking about eggs, about the eggs, and we'll come back to those. Um, did you have a chance to look over the food scarcity uh, page I sent you?
Yes, I did, and I
Okay,
see
so
what you're trying to do there. It's very exciting.
understanding what's going on, especially with climate change, because I know that nobody likes to talk about climate change in food, but it's a topic that has to be talked about. And I can talk about it from having a group called International Humanitarian Services (IHS), who came to me from Mexico. And laid at I ran an organization before this one called the Clean Technology Trade Alliance, and they came to us to say, is there a solution to replace agriculture that's been lost? And for the last 2 decades, the state of Chihuahua has been tracking a decline in agriculture due to desertification. Now,
Mm.
one of the things I like to point out, because there was a show, and I don't know if you saw it, called Years of Living Dangerously. In the very first episode, they were down in Texas watching people walk around, and Marwan and I talked about this a week ago, walking around a meat packing plant, praying for rain so that they can, bring their jobs back, bring the town back, and no one was talking about, um, climate change. That was not a thing to talk about. But south of the border in Mexico, a very Catholic country, they're talking about climate change because desertification has literally eliminated 80% of the agriculture in the state of Chihuahua and outsource and put over 100,000 people out of their homes, where they migrated to Juarez to try and reestablish something, and created a social crisis in the process. We came to the point where we looked at it and said, okay, we can't make rain happen. We can't make water resources appear, but we can reduce the amount of water used to grow crops. And we can recycle the water that is used and therefore eliminate some of the loss in that area. And we brought a bunch of people together, and they designed a concept of a growth center, which is basically using passive solar thermal mass, um, placement, water recycling, and filtering processes to grow food. And we started looking at various growing systems. Of course, there's permaculture, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. which is probably the best system if you've got the soil to sustain it, or you have to create the environment within it, and that starts adding complications to it. There's aquaponics, which
Mhm.
I actually am a huge fan of because it also can produce fish, but not in large enough quantities to replace, what we're losing. I like the hydroponics has been around forever. By the way, aquaponics has been around for over 1,000 years. It was being used in Mexico 1,000 years ago by the native tribes, and there's a track record all the way from that point. So it's not a new system. How we do it is a little new, but it's not new. Hydroponics has been around forever. It's very successful. I start getting skeptical with aeroponics because of the moving parts. It's not the system or the growth system itself, but it's the fact that you're using micronutrients and you're going to have the nozzles get plugged, you're going to have pump issues, you've got too many moving parts that raises the cost of growth. And these are things that I've been looking at for years. But when we started putting the growth centers together, we basically said, okay, so you have a lot of choices here, but the best choices are probably a combination of aquaponics and um, um, permaculture, natural growing, combined with an ecosystem or foundation of anaerobic digestion, reestablishing plants that will create a more healthy soil and be more water resistant, which you've taken out. So you have to look at this as in a macro way, as opposed to just putting a greenhouse in. And you have to look at it in a much larger way. You have to start thinking about cisterns and capturing rainwater when it comes, things like that. And they're just now starting to do some testing in Chihuahua, Mexico with that. It's only been 10 years. So these are the things we were looking at. And when you're talking about losing 80% of your agriculture, you have to start thinking climate change is going to be effective. We talked briefly about, Daniel, you still there? Because you froze.
Yeah, he needs to refresh there.
Okay. So we talked briefly. I'm losing too many pieces of track here.
There's a lot to
We
talk
talked.
about.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. We talked about the. Well, I'm just going to go on with. We talked about the fear mongering. We talked a little bit about climate change. We talked about a little bit about soil erosion and the nitrates and such washing down to the sea. With climate change and all of the flooding, that becomes a much greater issue. Flooding followed by drought. You're not giving the soil chances to reestablish. It could become a bigger problem. I'm not a scientist, but I've been reading a lot of articles by scientists, and that seems to be one of the biggest fears. More alarming to me as a layman is the lack of diversity. So I'm going to wait for Daniel to come back before we go into that one. In the meantime, why don't you pull up the greenhouse picture that I sent you?
Okay, let me go ahead and do that. All right. We're talking about this one here.
Yeah, that one here. Okay, so this greenhouse is in a place called Gunnison, Colorado. It is one of the 5 coldest cities in the United States.
Mm.
It drops to sub-zero temperatures every year. This greenhouse was built on a woman's farm, or about 10 years ago now. And it is made of a brick made by a company in Corvallis, Oregon called Fastwall. And the brick is, or Shelterworks, the brick is called the Fastwall brick. It is a wood impregnated concrete with foam filling. It has a natural insulation R value of 40. She built this greenhouse, and she has not heated these greenhouses at all, and she was growing vegetables all the way through Christmas. So think about the coldest city in the United States, one of the 5 coldest cities in the United States, and she was able to grow crops in this greenhouse unheated through Christmas.
You wouldn't happen to have any images inside, would you?
I do not. This is
That'd be
I was
fantastic.
I was actually talking to ShelterWorks about this, and they sent me this image of the greenhouse, and it uses thermal mass to keep the heat inside. But they didn't pioneer that. That was pioneered 40 years ago by a guy named Jerome Adolowski, and he's out of Aspen, Colorado. He lives at 7,200 feet. Um, and he has 4 greenhouses on his property. They are built with basalt rock for thermal mass. He composts up the center of it to create heat inside of these greenhouses. 3 of
Wow.
the greenhouses are unheated, but we'll talk about the 4th one in a moment. And can you put up the black and white photo I sent you, or is it
Sure.
too granulated?
No.
Okay, this is the top of a climate battery that he has in all of his greenhouses, and this is the greenhouse here. So, again, it's basalt rock. He composts inside the greenhouses. Underneath this climate battery are a group of pipes running underneath in a serpentine fashion throughout the entire greenhouse. And it's essentially a geothermal climate battery that keeps the temperature inside of the greenhouse at around 50 degrees. So even in the coldest times, it will keep the greenhouse in that 50-degree range. And with the composting he does inside the greenhouse, it raises the temperature because composting actually breaks down and creates heat as the materials are breaking down, and it keeps it inside the growing zone year round without any extra electricity or heating or anything. So it's a minimal impact, high efficiency greenhouse that he's been running for 40 years. Now, the 4th greenhouse, he cheats. This is his own words. He cheats on it. He has a pellet stove on the outside of it to raise the temperature in there, but there's a specific reason for it. And it actually took him 2 years to get the 4th greenhouse up and running because he had to get the soil right. But then again, he grows slightly different crops in that greenhouse. He grows avocados, he grows lemons, he grows oranges, he grows limes, he grows tea, he grows coffee, he grows bananas at 7,200 feet year round outside of Aspen, Colorado.
Wow.
So he does 100% permaculture. That's how he grows. And I think there's one more picture of him actually in his greenhouse. Marwan, if you can bring that up. Or this is the tropical greenhouse. And as you see, those trees are really healthy. And there are other pictures I have somewhere around that show him picking crops, and the health and color and vibrancy of the plants in these greenhouses is amazing. So this was the concept, or a huge piece of the concept, to put grow centers together. With the ShelterWorks bricks, to be able to create a thermal mass greenhouse and start growing food locally to create food security. And these are some of the things that we've been pushing in the Food for All project. But strangely enough, it's hard to get traction because you've got the small farmers that want to do what they want to do. And if you try and have a conversation with them, oh, we're too busy doing what we're doing with the CSA and everything else. You have the industrial farmers who are interested in doing mass growing and shipping to warehouses, going through production, shipping to you, and keeping commodity prices low. And there's some issues with their model. And this is what I wanted to get to. I was kind of introducing that while you were reloading. 2 or 3 issues that are with the mass production industry that we have now, in all of them are critical problems. One is the lack of diversity. We went from thousands of varieties of corn, thousands of varieties of tomatoes, thousands of varieties of wheat to 1 or 2. And
Yeah,
that is
monoculture
not,
is really killing us.
yeah, and it's not the natural way of a healthy environment. Health is about diversity. It's about diversity in all things, and we've brought it down to nothing. And then those systems are failing, and we're having to over-chemicalize to offset the failures. And we're constantly in this game of trying to catch up to the failures of our not following, of trying to change the natural order of things, to grow lots of food in one spot. And that is a failure to start with, in my mind, my opinion. It's a failure to start with, to try and beat the natural order instead of working with the natural order. And I get that we have an industrial mindset and we bring these big machines to play and we feel like we've got to do all this and then ship it everywhere. But when we do that, we put ourselves at risk. And again, in my mind, it's an issue of food security. And I have read a lot of the same reports you have, Daniel, about the erosion. And a lot of really good science is talking about the fact that we don't have, if we continue to grow the way we grow, including most of the supermarkets who just came out with a report a month ago. Let's see, it was Walmart, Costco, Kroger came out with a report and says if we continue to grow the way we're growing, we will not be able to grow at the end of the century. And that's their reports coming up.
I mean, imagine you go into a supermarket anywhere in this country and you're going to find 10 vegetables in every single supermarket. Exactly the same, the same zucchini. And that's ridiculous. Obviously, we have areas where we have different climate, certain things thrive, certain things. That's a industrial issue, but it's also a consumer issue, how to deal with different vegetables, how to deal with things that are a little, our recipes are all, we download them from the internet and it all calls for, the same and, some sort of commercial tomato and those sorts of things. And we don't products, if you talk to farmers, they love to nitrogen enriching crops, but gosh darn it, they can't unload all the beets and they can't unload that they grow that helps their soil, because people just don't get. Definitely needs to be a two-pronged approach. It's how we consume is a huge part of it. These companies want to make money, and they're going to make money by catering to us and the consumer. Often they realize. So that's a big part of it. Is working on our own culture, knowing what's local, and being able to have those things available. I know you eggs, right?
Yeah.
And how many people now who've got a couple of chickens in the backyard relieved because they don't have to go to the store and worry about are there going to be no eggs. Eat a ton of eggs because it's a good option for protein and calories that's not meat, and it's generally affordable. And the other part of the solution is everything things that just be the Whole Foods and the upscale farmer market. It has to be able to reach out for people, and those are the people who are most pressed for the time to be able to cook, and obviously most crushed for money. And the $1.49 pork butt and the $5 an hour pound ground beef, the produce that they can afford, and a lot of times it might be frozen, it might be canned, and pre-made foods because it's time and money and opportunity. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, so, I mean, ramen is a thing that a lot of people live on, and while I have nothing against ramen, it's like I wouldn't want it as a steady diet. And besides, I couldn't eat it anyhow. But yeah, it's a challenge, and food is one of those things. And part of our focus in the Kitsap Resiliency Project is to address the things people need most, because we have commercialized it so much that we basically sold ourselves out.
Right.
Water. One of the things we talk about, I started off my diatribe on the website with, you can't have food without water. You can't. So water isn't just because you're thirsty. Water isn't just because you're, dying in the desert looking for water. Water is in everything you eat. In cattle, in pigs, in produce, in everything we eat requires water.
Yeah.
So you need to start there. And
manufacturing process, and
yeah,
it's used in everything. So,
and we pay the least attention to that. Here in the county where I live, the government keeps talking about bringing 200,000 more people, and we have almost 300,000 people in the peninsula. And we're considered rural, sort of a weird mixture of rural and urban. And they want to bring 200,000 more people in, but nobody knows what the status of the water tables are. in the county, and we are 100% aquifer here. And I'm like going, so you want to bring 200,000 people in, but you don't know whether we have enough water for them. Also, if anything happens, any disaster happens, we have the Tacoma Narrows Bridge coming from Tacoma here, two bridges, one newer one older one. We have the Hood Canal Bridge, which is between us and the Olympic Peninsula, and it's a floating bridge. We have narrow roads going in and out north and south, and I mean narrow roads like 2-lane highways. And we have the ferries. Anything happens, we suddenly are cut off from everywhere with 3 days worth of food on the
flooding,
shelf.
tsunamis, and this is all stuff that does happen.
And we've had tornadoes in the last couple of years.
Yeah, weather is getting more and more crazy, predictable, and there's going to be so many more climate-related disasters everywhere. A bit, and it's interesting. We talk about how we eat, not to be that guy, but when I was in Italy, reflects the local things that they grow generally. I mean, you really can sort of see that, what's in season is very much part of what they eat. What they grow locally is what they part of eat. Have in this region are different than the varieties they have in those regions. And in a country this size, I'm sure we do need, we do need grain, and but we also need to have, as you point out, that local level of security, stuff that's pretty short supply chains, things that people can do for themselves, whether, or having a couple of chickens or having a small plot of land. I also think of Dawn, who's in her 90s. And when I was growing up, they had, but they grew enough to feed themselves, their friends. They canned, they made out of what they did. And it was a side project. They both worked full time, had a farm, and they had those skills to be able to get the most out of that farm, to grow them, to can them. So they would have them through the winter. And it's a skill set that, unfortunately, we don't know how to do that anymore.
Well, the funny thing is what we're discovering, and Marwan and I have been working on trying to develop neighborhood ambassadors so that we train someone in the neighborhood to have difficult conversations with the neighbors, how to engage them and find common ground, to do that education piece that you so eloquently pointed out, because we have to change the way we think about things so that we can change how we behave about things, so that we can actually change things to be better off all the way through. And we use the word thrive, and I was using it before it became a catchword for every sales organization of the world. But we have found in the neighborhoods, there are people who know how to grow and love to garden. And what we're trying to do is get them and their neighbors together to create neighborhood victory gardens, going back to a World War II phrase, where everyone gardens something, trades with everybody else so that they all have food. Yeah. Maybe not zucchini, because everybody's got zucchini.
You're not allowed to have more than one zucchini plant per house. That's the rule. It has to come from the ground up first. I really think that's the case. Engage. You have to get people who, and again, there's a lot of the vast majority of Americans don't necessarily have a yard where they can do this, and there's things that they can do. They can engage with their neighbors. I mean, it's something we can't. We need the skills not only to grow but to cook, and to enjoy it.
Yeah, and enjoying it, I think that's part of the education process. I mean, you and I are blessed. We both cook and we both understand flavor. Matter of fact, we just got Kitsap County of all places. We just got a local spice place, and I mean, it's like 5 minutes away from my house. And I go down there and I buy my ground ginger. I get my dill weed. I get my celery seed, because it's so much better than anything you can buy at the store. But I went down there and I said, I'm going to ask, but I don't have any chance that you're actually going to have it. But I'm looking for harissa because I do a lot of Moroccan cooking, and it's part of the Moroccan thing. It says, "Oh, we have it here," and it like blows my mind. A place in Kitsap County has harissa. Now, if I could just find a place that has rose water, I would be all good. But but yeah, it's
there's always a few things that you're gonna, that will be imported and specialty items. You want to be able to try, real Parmigiano from Italy, as well as having something local. I know, for example, I always used to do Jack cheese in Sonoma, and I tell you what, that is killer on a Caesar salad. And it was, and it's just a dry aged Jack cheese. I know that in your area they have some amazing cheeses.
Goat. So. There's a lot in our area. There's a lot of goat cheese, and I got to tell you, I am a big fan of goat cheese. The hard stuff, not as much, but I use goat cheese in a lot of the stuff that I make, and I am a big fan. But it's milder than a lot of the goat cheese I had in California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I can get, unfortunately, I've developed a little bit of lactose intolerance way into the goat cheeses and the sheep milk feta when I can find it and that sort of stuff, because I love all cheese. Unfortunately, I can still do the aged cheeses, and I'm very blessed to live in a place where we have a lot of great cheeses that are local.
And I'm gonna throw back a memory, and I don't know if you remember it because I know you came here from elsewhere, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, I lived in Berkeley, and there was a cheese shop on Shattuck that was just, you walk in the door and the whole place was chock-a-block full of cheese, probably 1,000 square feet of cheese and a counter, and you can go there and buy cheese blintzes that they had just made. And they had every kind of cheese you can. Up here, it's a little harder. I have to get on a ferry. I have to go over to Seattle. I have to walk up to Pike's Place Market, and there's a cheese shop there that actually has cheese. I mean, the stuff that you and I would buy for what we're doing. And I have to go there to, find Huntsman cheese, to find, real good Danish blue cheese to do that. So for me, it's a 3-hour journey to get enough cheese for for a couple weeks.
Which is okay as long as you're not doing it every day.
Yeah. But that, and it brings up a point, is that going back to the nutritional value, is that anecdotally, I can tell you that food has lost flavor over my lifetime. Back when I could eat corn, I stopped eating corn already because it was mealy and it didn't taste good anymore. The days of having the corn off the grill with butter on it and just absolutely savoring the experience 30 years ago, ended 30 years ago for me.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped eating it.
Not that long ago for me, but it really does come down to being when I could get the local Brentwood corn, or back on the East Coast. Lived in rural Western Massachusetts, and they do a lot of farming there. So you could hit the roadside stand, potatoes and corn, and the corn
and get the good stuff.
Of course, was phenomenal because it was.
Yeah.
But once you've had that, it's so hard to go back. Once you've had a tomato right off the vine, how can you go back to a refrigerated? You can't.
No. And it's like almost like the old days of the drug dealers. Yeah, no, you can't. It's kind of like, you go to the farm stand. It's like the old drug dealer days. It says, hook me up with the good stuff.
I mean, I'm definitely glad to see regions and heirlooms, and that's exciting. The heirloom tomatoes, heirloom beans, a varieties of stuff that is our palate is broadening, and I'm glad to see that. But we definitely could do more of it, and a lot of it has out of our knowledge and our ken.
So, interesting side note on corn specifically. I cannot eat anything with corn in it. It's an incredibly painful and long-lasting experience. It's like arthritis times 10 for a couple weeks. Um, I can't have maltodextrin. I can't have corn syrup. I can't have cornstarch. Any of that will trigger me. So it's hard finding food here. But
Yeah, it's
about
hard
8 years
to
ago,
eat at a restaurant because a lot of times they don't
I
even
don't.
necessarily know.
There are 3 restaurants I will eat at in Kitsap County, and all 3 know me, and
Mhm,
all 3 are very careful about making sure that I get stuff that won't trigger me. And for that,
mhm.
I am incredibly blessed that I have found 3 that I can go to. But an interesting thing happened. I already was knowing, I had already found out I was sensitive to corn and it was triggering me. And I had to go to Mexico for the Chihuahua project and another project that we were doing in Ensenada. And I was driving back, a guy was driving me back, and he pulled off to a roadside taco stand in just north of Ensenada. And I said, "Oh, what the hell? Let's see." And it was still in that not certain phase. And I had a street taco with corn tortilla, no effect.
Hmm,
So I had no negative
hmm.
effects from that. But I had a corn tortilla when I got back to the United States, and I was down for 2 weeks.
Wow.
Mexico doesn't do
Fascinating.
GMO.
Hmm. Yeah. Imagine that corn in Mexico is probably local, handmade tortilla.
Yeah.
It's,
And
it's,
so, and
it's an
suddenly I'm not
interesting.
sick.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and that's stuck in my head, and I keep thinking about this. I'm just saying, yeah, you're right, and thank you for bringing it up because it supports what we do, which is educating people to a different way of thinking. A lot of what we do in the Kids Up Resiliency Project is help people gain a different perspective. And food is so core to who we are. A lot of what we talk about with the Kids Up Resiliency Project is, it starts with breaking bread. It is the oldest human condition. You make a relationship by breaking bread and sharing bread with somebody.
Hmm. Yeah, the laws of hospitality are.
So our whole thing is let's understand that, and then let's understand the bread and honor the sacred bread we're eating. And
Mhm.
that doesn't come from a box.
No. Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I fashion. It's very, very important to me, and I thrive on and those experiences become harder and harder today. And it's a shame. I think we're living in an age where you have people who are willing to try things, experiment with things, people who want to learn to do. And I think it's really, really important that if you provide resources and good experience, they'll come back to that. And that ties right into your last meal, right? And it's very much about making human connections that's so critical for sort of new routine, new habits, and changing the way people live. You have to make it enjoyable, and I think that it's in a good way. You absolutely can do that. Um, you can, uh, there are people who love to garden, and it's a great way to honor stresses, and you're not doom scrolling on your Facebook. You're out in the dirt, and people who try it find it to be, and I find for me, spending that time in the kitchen to chop up vegetables and gather a meal is super critical to my
Yeah,
mental health.
it's life.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's touching life. Yeah. Now the great part is, and my partner and I are talking about where we're going to go from here, where we live now. But wherever we go, we have to have a garden because right
Mhm.
now we're restricted in what we can grow. We get grow some cherry tomatoes, we grow some herbs, but that's about all we can really do here. So next place we go, we want to, I want I want to grow garlic. There are so many varieties of garlic, and I'm so sick of going and getting the same garlic again and again that has no flavor. This is usually, the recipe calls for 4 cloves of garlic. Well, that must mean like 2 bulbs. And
Yeah.
we might get some garlic. We might get some garlic flavor then.
Yeah. Garlic is a success with container garlic, by the way. So if you wanted to try experimenting,
Okay.
I know people indoor pot garlic will work.
Yeah, there was a guy up here who unfortunately died a few years ago who was producing like 12 varieties of garlic. And I had some of I think it was German brown and some purple Russian garlic that I made into a soup. And it was the first time in a soup that I actually felt the garlic flavor come through.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was an amazing thing. Anyway, our hour is just about up and it was fascinating. Would you be willing to come back and talk to us again on one of our future episodes about food?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. And thank you, Daniel. You can stick around. Marwan and I usually do a close, and actually, why don't you do the last word? Tell us your last word on food.
On food is learn to savor it. Really enjoy what you're doing. The experience, the prepping, and the consumption, and the sharing. That's the most important thing. I like making food for myself, but I love, and that's what really brings me back to it again and again.
Daniel, before we let you go, we talked about it behind the scenes, but he didn't get a chance to talk about it in front of the camera. So, can you tell folks your background? You are Chef Daniel Long. So, can you talk a little bit about where you chefed at, and just give us a little bit of your bio?
Over. I was a chef for about 35 years. I worked in a bunch of kitchens, and once I got skills in the kitchen, I moved around the country. I moved from Massachusetts, my home state, to Canada, and I was doing restaurants. And then I got into corporate food service. I worked with a company called Guggenheimer, both of them who do on colleges, businesses. We talked a little bit about Larry Ellison, those sorts of things. What's interesting is those companies both really wanted to local sustainability, especially for reducing composting. They really, both of them have pioneered a lot of the composting initiatives that I've seen. And we used to do these things called Eat Local challenges, where every single would have to be from within 50 miles of the cafe, which is challenging, even in an area of a lot of produce. We live in a population dense area, so to find what items we could use, and it was a good challenge. I've worked in corporate. I worked at P.F. Chang's for a while, so I really sort of walk. And I did a lot of catering. I did a lot of feeding. My specialty was generally large operations. I did Gilead. I was a head chef at Gilead, and that was a pharmaceutical company with thousands of employees, and I had about 90 employees in 6 different kitchens. But we always were really focused on trying to, and when you feed people every day, it's very different than a restaurant experience. It's a restaurant experience, menu, and they come in. But when you're feeding people every day, you got to have a variety. You got to find what people like. And as much as you want to do, stuff that serves your chef soul, you also got to have, chowder on Fridays and those sorts of things. So it's really to know what people like to eat, and how can we help them, is how can we do what we call stealth nutrition, where we can take dishes and make them healthier and use local ingredients and still somehow meet a budget, those sorts of things. So I love that. Really my background.
Word of the day for me, stealth nutrition. Well, I
That's a good way,
appreciate you
sneaking
coming
kids
on.
meals, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and as Mark said, we'd love to have you back again very soon. For everyone that is tuning in, we're going to go immediately over to Kitsap Housing and Homeless Coalition, which is going to start here in about 60 seconds. So please follow us over there. And then tonight we will have the Olympic College board meeting, and also we will have a mortgage workshop this evening. So two things going on at the same time. So do tune in. This is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. This is the Conduit. For Daniel, Mark, I am Marwan Cameron. We